their curricula. And she oftentimes works with organizations like the Salvation Army, Habitat for Humanity. She teaches a positive psychology course. And so for her, a big part of the goal is how do I help students understand that in some respects they're benefiting more from volunteer work than the organization that they're working with, just in terms of their own personal well-being and sense of self-satisfaction. And so where my students are building websites and Dave's and my students are building software applications, these students in some cases are serving food and building houses. So again, serving a very specific community need, but in a way that fits in a particular way with the goals and objectives that that particular instructor has. And I'll come back to this at the end, but I think in part what this means is that depending on your interest and your specific need, I have a hard time thinking about any department on campus and not being able to imagine some way that their students could be out and involved and engaged in the community in a way that connects them to the community as a professional as well. So that being said, our first client on campus was Community Care of Central Wisconsin. This was a group of sophomores, and it was really kind of fun how this happened because Kate, who works for Community Care and kind of served as our point of contact for the project, called and said, I'd really like to hire someone to build a website for us. And I had been away from this world for a while. I had been working in industry for 10 years. I had kind of forgotten about that work that had started at Purdue. And as soon as Kate called, it all came flooding back. And I said, you know, I have a proposal for you. Can we talk and see if there's another way to work on this project? So as a class, we actually had 4 teams of 4 working with Kate to propose 4 different designs for the web, and gave her the real interesting challenge of trying to figure out, based on some really fabulous work, which design was she going to go forward with. And it was a nice approach at the time because there were a couple of groups that were a little bit stronger than the other groups, and so she had some choices to make, and then a very real decision to make in terms of launching the site. So that was the team that built the original version of the website for Community Care, and they did that as sophomores. But the nice thing about working with Kate and her organization is that I always struggle a little bit in terms of my perspective on finding good clients, and part of the time I worry that, you know, this is a small place and we're going to run out of projects and clients, which, by the way, has not been true in the 5 years that I've been here and probably never will. But then at other times really struggle with just the sheer amount of time that it takes to find good partners, to foster those relationships, and to really find good, rich, meaningful projects for everyone that's involved. It just takes a lot of time. With Community Care of Central Wisconsin, this is the current version of their website. This was our second project with them, and something that the seniors worked on. Much more advanced in terms of the functionality for the site. They built in the ability for employees to log in to a special version of the site, so kind of an intranet, if you will, if you're familiar with that term, to share documents with each other, to provide some more interesting visual spaces on the homepage to talk about the specific service offerings that they offer that might be a little bit more time sensitive. So where this project, you know, probably entailed 40 or 50 hours of work, this one would have been closer to 750 to 800 hours of work approximately. And again, the goal would have been to successfully complete and launch this site within that 16-week time frame. It's a little bit of an aside, but in terms of the value to students, in terms of the work that they're able to do here, when they finish the project, our expectation is that we go back to our partner organization and we share our work with them. And so most of the time what that looks like, we've done some work for the library. So we'll come down to the library. I remember sitting in this very room with 4 students and with 3 to 4 librarians and the director. And it's a nice, casual kind of conversation. You know, lots of celebrating if everything's gone well at that point, and it usually does. Community care was a little bit different. Our client neglected to tell us that we were going to be presenting our work at their annual meeting, and that there would be roughly 100 or so people in attendance. No big deal. We had 4 students up against the wall with their backs, eyes this big around, and so we marched them out into the hallway and did a quick pep talk, talked about how to adjust their strategy for that kind of audience, got back into the room, and everything went just fantastically. I think in some respects that team presented more professionally and more effectively because the audience was so much larger than they expected. It really just forced them to turn up their game a little bit, if you will, in terms of how seriously they were taking the opportunity. What I don't have for community care is that what this has also turned into in terms of long-term relationships are some of the students whose names were on the previous slides went on to do paid internship work for community care. Some of them used that relationship to connect with Portage County government to work on their website for them. And so has really, for the students who have taken these projects very seriously, led in some cases to other community service work, to internships, and in some cases to their full-time employment as well. So really served to open some doors for them. Community care for us also opened up some additional opportunities in the area. North Central Healthcare, if you're familiar with them, are Wausau based. And so their CEO saw what Jim Canales was able to get out of a student group with community care and said, "Me too, please." And so word of mouth has really helped in terms of, you know, helping to find really appropriate, interesting projects for us to work on, and it's made my life a little bit easier in terms of where these come from. When we're working on those projects, one of the things that we do talk about in class is that it's not just about technology for technology's sake. I mean, yeah, I was excited about my new iPhone just as much as anyone else was, but for technology to be truly useful, you really need to think about it in context and in the context of helping to provide some kind of very real human need in the community. And as technologists, we usually don't do that a whole lot. And so to remind ourselves that there are effective and ineffective uses of technology, there are good and less good uses of technology, I think is meaningful conversation for all of us to be able to engage in. One of the things that helps to facilitate and make that very real are our local service organizations, and we've worked with a number of them on projects, sometimes for them directly. So we've designed websites for Rotary International. For Community Foundation of Greater Southwood County, we've created databases to help them think about relationships between professionals in the community and how we can assist with networking opportunities and problem solving. And in other cases, as members of some of those organizations, some of our very best projects have arisen just because I've happened to be sitting down next to someone for lunch, and we've made a connection and discovered that there's a very real need that that individual needs with respect to their organization, and based on that conversation we kind of take next steps from there. So I'm not currently, but in the past I've been a member of Rotary here in town, and some of our best projects, the American Red Cross, for example, have come as a result of those relationships. So for my colleagues, one of the things that I really like to talk about here is that, do get involved in service organizations, partly because I think it's just the right thing to do, but partly because if you're thinking about service learning and about community-based projects, that's going to help in terms of helping you create and manage that network and get connected to the right folks. So this is the point where I say, but you know what? I am still an academic. I'm still responsible for a classroom and for the learning that needs to take place. And so when I am thinking about projects, I'm thinking about what I want students to learn and how I want them to engage. And in some cases, what that means is our projects may look a little bit different than the web examples that we've provided so far. So in these particular cases, and Drew, who's in the front row, worked on the Red Ink project. And this was a really neat community project. In terms of connections, this project came from the Community Foundation of Greater Southwood County, who had grant money from the Knight Foundation. And the Knight Foundation discovered that MIT in Cambridge also had Knight money to do the same thing. And it was Knight who said, you guys need to play together and make some stuff happen. We're not going to duplicate efforts and money in solving the types of problems that we've asked you to. And we'll get to those problems in just a second. The Community Foundation ran into a problem because these MIT folks had some brilliant ideas for what we could do. And because they were in a media lab, and Drew can attest to this, because I remember the Saturday that we sat in our computer lab, and I look over and Drew's eyes are this big around because these MIT guys, and the T stands for technology. MIT is also Tim spelled backwards, they pointed out, and I don't know what they meant by that, but they didn't know how to program. And so they were teaching us some really cool things about media and what we could do with it in the community, and we were teaching them to program. And I think it was Drew who said, my God, I can't believe I'm teaching a graduate student from MIT something about technology. This is really cool. The projects that we worked on in this case were very different and still very focused in the community. The first one was called Red Ink, and the photo, and it's difficult to see, and I apologize for that, was really intended to build software that would help just the everyday person learn how to better manage their money. And so the problem we were trying to solve here specifically was the Community Foundation had been doing a great job of educating local employers about what a livable wage was. And for a family of 4 in Southwood County, it's somewhere on the plus side of $14.50. Okay? They were, one of the local cranberry producers was paying somewhere around $2 to $3 an hour lower than that. What they felt they could afford to pay, and probably what they felt the market indicated they should pay. And someone in the organization kind of heard that message from the Community Foundation and said, you know what, you're right. And we need to do the right thing, and we need to pay a livable wage. So they gave everyone what amounted to roughly a $2 an hour raise. They said problem solved, and they walked away. And as we can probably guess, that didn't solve the problem, right? So just because you have that extra roughly $4,000 to $5,000 extra a year in your household budget, it doesn't mean that you know how to be a good steward for that money at that particular point. So Red Ink was very much designed as an application to help households keep track of what they were earning, what they were saving, and how they were spending their money so that they could make adjustments to their behavior when it came to household finances if they needed to. The second one in terms of need, and the second one is very near and dear to my heart, and it's because my wife and I have a small home on the Wisconsin River in Buren. And this was the spring after the 500-year, or the fall after, the spring after the 500-year flood from the fall prior. I got to get my seasons correct. And I mean, we had river water that was from me to the table away in terms of how close it got to our back door. And it was the first time that we had been through that. And you know, we were lucky, no damage, but still a really frightening, humbling kind of experience to have. The problem we identified and we're trying to solve in that particular case is FEMA had just been in the community the spring prior, and they updated their floodplain maps, which they do very infrequently. And apparently we discovered, no offense to anyone in the room, if there's anyone from FEMA in the room, I hope not, They weren't very accurate, and so the river flooded, but it didn't flood where the FEMA maps said that it would. That's a real problem because those FEMA maps help set who's eligible for flood insurance and who's eligible, right, for any kind of assistance if a state of emergency gets declared and there's federal monies available. We had a second group who worked with a web-based tool that allowed us to take flood photos. And this is a little bit hard to see, but the main map is an overlay of downtown Wisconsin Rapids, and these gray squares are flood photos that were stitched onto the map from the last 500-year flood or 100-year flood. The numbers seem a little fuzzy to me because the floods are happening more frequently than every 500 years, so there's a little disconnect there. But we mapped photos from the flood of 1894 onto the map, and then thanks to local photographers, and I was one of them at the time, we mapped our images on, and then we used this information to build a little survey that allowed us to say, we think this is where flooding occurred, this is where FEMA thought it would occur, and we created a map-based survey and went out into the community and asked those who were affected to help us map what they saw and observed with the flood, and we mapped that data on top of this as well. And my understanding from the Community Foundation is that this then gave the community updated maps to go back to FEMA to try and argue for some adjustments to that map so that when the river floods again, because we know it will flood again, hopefully now we have some more accurate data to help with that. So this project helped to address that situation. I have colleagues right upstairs from me that I should acknowledge here because they do community-based mapping as well, and they're the experts. They really get how this works and how to train folks to go out and do that kind of mapping. And if they were here tonight, they could tell you that it's perhaps counterintuitive, but amazing at how much more accurate community member maps are than a governmental entity's maps often be, and why? They have a vested interest in what they're mapping. So with the right training, and it doesn't take that much training, can really make a remarkable difference. Last example, this is actually another mapping project in the community. This again is Wisconsin Rapids. I spend a lot of my time giving to the Community Foundation, and so that's where a lot of these examples come from. In this particular case, this is Jeff Warren from MIT. What Jeff was helping us do in this particular case is he devised a kit for balloon-based cameras to help kids map a local area. And so his claim to fame with the project and how we heard about him was in Ecuador, where the children in the village used balloons and cameras to then map their village, because once the village had a map, they were then recognized by the government, and once they were recognized by the government, that triggered some services and some tax dollars and some other investments that without a map and without houses with addresses attached to them, they didn't have access to.